Victoria Crane raised her hand and slapped a man across the face in front of 400 witnesses, cameras, and crystal chandeliers, because she thought he was nobody. She was wrong. The man she struck owned the $3 billion contract she had spent 2 years chasing. And within 6 hours of that slap, every penny of it was gone. But here's what nobody saw coming. It wasn't the money that broke her. It was a 7-year-old girl, a strawberry tart, and a father who had already survived things far worse than Victoria Crane. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it hits you, subscribe. This one's worth it. The tuxedo didn't fit right. Isaiah Bennett knew it the moment he pulled it from the rental bag that afternoon. The shoulders were a 1/4 inch too wide. The sleeves dropped just past his wrist bones, and the lapels had that faint shine that comes from being steamed and returned too many times by too many different men. He stood in his bathroom mirror, adjusting and readjusting, and finally just left it. Nia appeared in the doorway behind him, already in her dress deep navy blue with small white stars along the hem. The one she had picked herself 3 weeks ago when he told her there might be a fancy event coming up. She had her mother's eyes. That fact hit him every single time, and he had learned not to let it show on his face. "You look handsome, Daddy. You're biased. I'm 7. I don't even know what that means." He laughed. It was the first real laugh he'd had all day. He checked his watch, a scratched Seiko his father had left him, the one luxury he refused to replace, and thought about calling the whole thing off. The babysitter, Mrs. Okafor from 2 streets over, had phoned at 4 in the afternoon with a family emergency. He'd spent 90 minutes trying to find a replacement and came up empty. His backup, Nia's school friend's mother, had a sick kid at home. His cousin hadn't answered. His business partner, Marcus, had offered, but Marcus lived 45 minutes away, and the timing didn't work. Which left him here, straightening a rented tuxedo in a bathroom mirror, accepting the reality that his 7-year-old daughter was coming with him to one of the important business events of his professional life. He looked down at her. "You understand the rules? Stay close. Use my inside voice. Don't touch anything on the tables. And if I see something pretty, I look with my eyes, not my hands. Good. 1 hour. Then we go home and make hot chocolate." Nia's face lit up. "With the mini marshmallows? As many as you want." She reached up and took his hand. Isaiah picked up the invitation from the counter-heavy cream cardstock. Embossed lettering, the Grand Meridian Hotel seal pressed into the lower corner, and walked his daughter out into the November night. The Grand Meridian sat on the edge of downtown, like it owned the air around it. 42 floors of glass and steel, a fountain out front that changed colors. Valets in matching gray coats moving with choreographed efficiency. The kind of building that told you before you even walked in exactly what class of person was expected to be inside. Isaiah had been to buildings like this hundreds of times. He knew what they communicated. He also knew that the communication was rarely directed at him. The line for the entrance moved quickly for most guests. A man with silver cufflinks walked through without showing anything. A woman in a fur stole was greeted by name. An older couple, white, stepped past the checkpoint with a wave. Isaiah reached the checkpoint. He handed over his invitation. The security supervisor, a heavy-set man with a navy earpiece and a lanyard that read Marshall, took the card and studied it. Then he studied Isaiah. Then the card again. Name, Bennett. Isaiah Bennett. Marshall typed something into a tablet. Scrolled. Typed again. And the child? My daughter. Nia Bennett. Children aren't on the guest list. My name is on the guest list. She's with me. My babysitter had an emergency. Marshall didn't respond immediately. He looked past Isaiah at the couple behind them, gave them a quick nod and a smile. The kind of nod that said with you in 1 second. Sorry for the wait. Then looked back at Isaiah with an entirely different expression. I'll need to call this in. That's fine. 3 minutes passed. The line behind Isaiah grew. He stood with his hand in Nia's and kept his face completely still. He had learned that stillness years ago. Any other expression on a black man's face in a moment like this gets interpreted the wrong way. And then the situation becomes something different, entirely. Nia looked up at him. He squeezed her hand once, slowly. I've got you. We're fine. Marshall finally lifted his radio, murmured something, waited, then lowered it. Go ahead. No apology. No explanation. Isaiah walked his daughter through the entrance of the Grand Meridian without a word. The ballroom on the 14th floor was everything the lobby promised and more. Vaulted ceilings with chandeliers the size of small cars. Round tables draped in white linen, each set with enough silverware to confuse a surgeon. A jazz quartet in the far corner playing something smooth and forgettable. Waitstaff moving through the crowd with practiced invisibility. Trays balanced at shoulder height. 400 people, approximately. Isaiah scanned the room the way he always did when he entered unfamiliar spaces, not from anxiety, but from habit. He had spent enough years as the only black man in rooms like this to know that awareness wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Nia pressed close to his side. It's loud, she said quietly. It'll calm down once people sit. There are a lot of diamonds. Don't look too long. It's impolite. How do you know which ones are real? Isaiah almost smiled. You don't. That's also kind of the point. They moved along the edge of the room, Isaiah nodding to a few people he recognized, business contacts. Engineers from the industry, a city councilman he'd worked with on a grid expansion project. He avoided the center of the floor deliberately. Not from shyness. From strategy. He had come tonight with one purpose: to observe Victoria Crane in her natural habitat. To watch how she behaved when she believed no one consequential was watching. The first incident happened within 10 minutes of arrival. A man in his 50s, good suit, the kind that's made rather than bought off a rack. Silver hair swept back from a sunburned forehead, approached Isaiah with an almost imperceptible shift in posture. The kind of shift that's hard to name but easy to feel. Excuse me, the man said, extending an empty lowball glass in Isaiah's direction without making eye contact. Scotch, neat, Macallan, if they have it. He was already looking past Isaiah when he said it, scanning the room for someone else. Isaiah looked at the glass for 1 second, then at the man. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. The man's eyes came back. He took in Isaiah's tuxedo, his face, Nia beside him. And something recalibrated behind his eyes, not embarrassment. Exactly, more like mild inconvenience. My apologies, the man said flatly, and walked away. Nia looked up at her father. He thought you were a waiter, he did. You're not a waiter. I know. Did that make you mad? Isaiah considered the question carefully. He always considered her questions carefully, because she deserved careful answers. It made me tired, he said honestly. There's a difference. The second incident came 15 minutes later, near the corridor that led to the event registration table. A woman in her early 60s, wearing a champagne-colored gown and enough perfume to announce herself from 8 feet away, stopped in front of Isaiah with an expression of theatrical concern. I'm sorry, did you come in through the service entrance? I only ask because I saw a well. She glanced down at Nia. The staff entrance is usually better for accommodations, fewer eyes. Isaiah looked at her with the patient, level expression he had developed across a lifetime of these moments. I came in through the main entrance, same as everyone else. Of course. She was already backing away, already constructing a story in which she had done nothing wrong. I just thought, never mind. She dissolved into the crowd. Nia pulled on Isaiah's sleeve. Why do they keep thinking you work here? Daddy? He knelt down beside her right there in the middle of the Grand Meridian ballroom. Around them, servers drifted past with trays of appetizers. Guests laughed at things that probably weren't that funny. And the jazz quartet transitioned into something with a little more tempo. Isaiah looked at his daughter's face. She wasn't upset, not yet. She was asking a real question, the way 7-year-olds do, with no filter between the thought and the mouth, and she deserved a real answer. Because some people decide who you are before they take the time to know you, he told her. They look at a face, or a piece of clothing, or a neighborhood, and they make a decision. And once they've made it, they stop looking. That's not right, no, it isn't. So why do they do it? Because it's easier than paying attention. But that's their failure, Nia. Not ours. We don't carry that, she thought about it. The way she processed information quietly, her eyes going slightly distant, reminded him so much of Danielle that his chest ached. Okay, she said finally, like she was filing it away. like she'd decided to accept the explanation and move on, because she trusted him to tell her the truth, and the truth was sufficient. He stood up and took her hand again. 30 more minutes, he said. Then hot chocolate. With the big marshmallows this time. Not the little ones. We don't have the big ones. We could stop and get them. We could. She smiled. And for a moment the Grand Meridian, and its chandeliers and its diamond-draped guests, faded to background noise. And there was only his daughter's smile, which was the most important thing in any room he'd ever stood in. He spotted Victoria Crane near the center of the ballroom at 47 minutes past arrival. He recognized her from photographs and the 2 brief video calls they'd had through intermediaries over the previous 6 months. She was taller than he expected, close to 5'10" in heels, and she moved through the room the way people move when they have never once in their adult lives been required to step aside for anyone. The crowd parted around her, not because she was beautiful, though she was striking, but because she radiated a very specific kind of certainty. She wore white, a deliberately chosen contrast against the ballroom's color palette, Isaiah suspected. Victoria Crane struck him as a woman who thought in terms of visual dominance. He watched her from across the room. He watched how she listened or didn't, how she touched people's arms when she spoke to them in a way that looked warm from a distance, but, up close, was probably just another form of control. How her eyes moved over the staff as though they were furniture. He had seen this before. Not this specific woman, but this specific way of seeing, or rather, not seeing the people who kept a room like this functional. The cooks, the servers, the janitors who would be here at 2 in the morning cleaning up after 400 people who never learned their names. Isaiah had grown up watching his mother clean houses for families who couldn't remember what she looked like. He had become one of the most powerful people in the American energy infrastructure, and he still remembered every single person who had ever treated him like the help. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. He was still watching Victoria when Nia slipped sideways to look at the dessert table. He felt it before he saw it, that specific pressure change, when a small child's hand drifts out of yours without full intention. He turned, and there was Nia, 3 feet to his left, her eyes enormous at the sight of the tiered display of pastries and petit fours and small elaborate things that looked like they'd been constructed by architects rather than bakers. Nia, she reached for nothing. She only leaned forward slightly, just to see, just to look, and the edge of her elbow caught the corner of the linen tablecloth, and the strawberry tart at the very edge of the display slid sideways, tilted off the table's edge, and fell. It hit the floor directly beside Victoria Crane's right shoe. Then, through a series of events that required a physics degree to fully appreciate, it bounced once strawberry side down and deposited itself squarely on the white leather toe of Victoria Crane's right heel. Everything nearby went quiet. Victoria looked down at her shoe. Then she looked at the strawberry tart. Then she raised her eyes and looked at Nia. And Nia, because she was her father's daughter, immediately stepped forward. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I'm really sorry." Victoria Crane looked at this seminal child the way a person looks at a cockroach they've found in a 5-star restaurant. Isaiah moved. He was between them in under 2 seconds, placing himself directly in Victoria's line of sight, positioning his body as a wall between her expression and his daughter. "I apologize for the accident," he said. His voice was level and clear. "I'm happy to have your shoes cleaned or replaced. Please direct that to me, not to her." Victoria's eyes moved up from Nia to Isaiah. She took him in the slightly wrong tuxedo, the scratched watch, the little girl behind him, and made a decision in approximately 3 seconds. "Is this your child?" "Yes. This is a private event. Children aren't permitted. My name is on the guest list. She's with me. It was an accident. Your name." Victoria said it the way you repeat something that clearly doesn't compute. "And who exactly are you, a guest?" Victoria looked at the nearest security guard, a young man's stationed near the dessert table, and tilted her head the way people do when they want something handled, without having to personally lower themselves to handle it. Isaiah watched the guard's face. The guard was about 25, clearly uncomfortable, looking between Isaiah and Victoria, with the expression of a man realizing he was being asked to do something he couldn't entirely justify. "Ma'am," the guard started. "The gentleman does have an invitation. I didn't ask you to verify his invitation. I asked you to handle this." The guard's jaw tightened. Isaiah kept his eyes on Victoria. "Whatever you have to say," Isaiah said quietly, "you can say it to me directly. Don't send someone else to manage a conversation you're capable of having yourself." Victoria's chin lifted slightly. A tiny involuntary tell. She was recalibrating. "I don't know who you think you are. I think I'm a father whose daughter accidentally knocked a tart off a table. I think I've offered to replace your shoes. I think a reasonable person accepts an apology from a 7-year-old and moves on with their evening." "A reasonable person," Victoria repeated, and her voice dropped half a register, in the way a voice drops when warmth is being retracted entirely. "Does a reasonable person bring a child to a black tie event? Does a reasonable person—" Her eyes traveled his tuxedo again. And this time she didn't bother making the assessment subtle show-up like this to an event at the Grand Meridian. Naya's small hand found the back of Isaiah's jacket. He felt her fingers curl into the fabric. He breathed. Once slowly, "I've offered you a fair resolution. My daughter has apologized. The accident is done. This is a private event, and you are disrupting it. Marcus," she raised her voice now, calling across the space to the security supervisor, who was already moving toward them, "please remove this person and his." A pause, so small most people would have missed its situation. Marshall arrived with another guard behind him. Isaiah looked at Marshall. Marshall looked at Isaiah. And for just a moment, something passed between them: recognition, or shame, or both. "Sir," Marshall started, "I'm going to have to ask." "Wait." Isaiah's voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. There was something in the way he said it, not angry, not desperate, just absolutely certain, that made Marshall stop. Isaiah turned back to Victoria Crane. 400 people in this ballroom. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. The nearest 20 or 30 guests were openly watching. Crystal glasses paused halfway to lips. Conversations abandoned. "You may own this ballroom," Isaiah said. "And the hotel may be named after something your family built. And that dress may have cost more than most people in this country make in a month." He didn't raise his voice. "Not once. But money has not taught you dignity. And rank has not taught you what to do with power." Victoria's face went through something fast and complicated that moved behind her eyes and then locked down. "Remove him," she said. And then, in front of 400 witnesses, 2 rolling cameras capturing the event for Crane Global's communications team, and his 7-year-old daughter, who had done nothing wrong, Victoria Crane raised her hand and slapped Isaiah Bennett across the face. The sound was sharp, clean, unmistakable. Not the sound of the impact itself, but the silence that followed it. That silence was the loudest thing that had happened in that ballroom all night. It rolled out from the point of contact in a wave, silencing conversations that had been 20 feet away, causing the bartender at the far end of the room to lower his shaker and look up, causing a woman near the door to press her hand over her mouth. Isaiah didn't move. He absorbed the impact and he stood. He tasted copper, his lip against his tooth, and he breathed, and he stood. Nia made a sound. A small choked sound, barely audible. The sound a child makes when they are trying not to cry because they don't want to make things worse. Isaiah turned and picked her up. She wrapped her arms around his neck immediately and buried her face against his shoulder. And he held her the way he had been holding her since she was 3 days old and too small, and the world was too big. And he turned back to Victoria Crane one final time. Victoria was standing very still. Around her, no one moved. No one spoke. Isaiah looked at her the way you look at something you're committing to memory. "Thank you," he said. His voice was completely, absolutely calm. "You just showed me exactly who you are before I trusted you with anything that matters." Then he walked across the ballroom, with his daughter in his arms, past the frozen guests, and the stopped musicians, and the security guards who did not move to stop him, and out the door of the Grand Meridian Hotel into the cold November air. Outside, the fountain changed from blue to white to blue again. A valet looked up from his phone. A cab idled at the curb. Isaiah kept walking until he reached the corner, out of sight of the entrance, and then he stopped. He set Nia down gently and went to one knee on the sidewalk, not caring about the rented tuxedo on the concrete, and looked at his daughter's face. She was crying. quietly, the way she always cried, like she was embarrassed to take up too much emotional space with it. That was something they were still working on, the two of them. Her right to take up space. Daddy's lip is bleeding, she said. I know, it's okay, it's not okay, she hurt you. She didn't hurt me, baby. She hit you. Those are two different things. You understand? She looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was steady. She doesn't know you, Nia said finally. No. She didn't even ask. She didn't. That's why she did it. Isaiah looked at his daughter. 7 years old, and she had just named it more precisely than most adults could. He felt something move in his chest, grief and pride mixed together in a way that had no simple name. That's exactly why, he said. He stood up and hailed the cab and held Nia's hand and waited for it to pull to the curb. She leaned against him, her head just reaching his ribs, and looked back at the hotel once. Are we going back? No. Good, she said. I didn't like it in there. The cab pulled up. Isaiah opened the door and helped Nia inside, and then he got in, and the door closed, and the Grand Meridian Hotel disappeared behind them in the rear window. Nia fell asleep with her head against his arm before they reached the highway. Her fingers were still curled lightly around two of his. Isaiah looked out the window at the city, passing by the lights, the freeway overpasses, the neighborhoods that shifted from glass and steel to brick and board as you got further from town. And he made a decision. Not out of anger. He had long ago learned that anger without direction becomes corrosion. Not out of wounded pride, because his pride had survived things that made tonight look mild. Not even because of the slap. Because of what came before the slap. Because of the chain of assumptions that had been assembled like building blocks over 47 minutes inside a hotel ballroom. A man handed an empty glass because he looked like someone who should be carrying one. A father asked whether he'd entered through the service door. A security guard sent to handle a conversation instead of a woman simply using her own voice. An invitation checked twice while white guests walked through without question. And underneath all of it, underneath every moment, the constant, heavy, exhausting presumption that he was less, that his presence required justification, that his daughter's accident was an offense rather than an accident. Victoria Crane hadn't just slapped him. She had slapped a version of him she'd invented on her own, the version without company, without the patents, without the 15 years of overnight shifts and board meetings, and court battles, and foolishly stretches when the power grid in 3 states depended on decisions he made, alone. She had slapped the version she decided he was, and she had no idea. He looked down at Nia, sleeping against him, and made a quiet, irrevocable decision, the way he made all his real decisions without drama, without announcement, without anyone else in the room. The acquisition was over. He would make the call when he got home. $3 billion. Gone. Not because he had been struck. Because what the striking revealed could not be unseen. And what it revealed about Victoria Crane made her the most dangerous possible person to hand control of the infrastructure that kept hospitals running, that kept dialysis machines powered, that kept the lights on in neighborhoods that nobody in that ballroom had ever driven through. He looked out at the city. He kept the lights on, even when people tried to make him feel invisible. Nia's breathing deepened against his arm. The cab moved through the night. Isaiah pressed 2 fingers lightly to his lip, felt the swelling beginning, and looked at the scratched face of his father's watch. 12:02 a.m. He had a phone call to make. Malcolm Reed picked up on the second ring, which told Isaiah everything about the kind of lawyer Malcolm was. It was 12 minutes past midnight. Malcolm had a wife, 3 kids, and a house in the suburbs with a mortgage the size of a small country's GDP. And he still picked up on the second ring. Isaiah, tell me the gala went well. Terminate the acquisition. A pause. The kind of pause that isn't silence, it's a man rapidly assembling information. How bad was it? Call it done, Malcolm, tonight. I want the termination notice at Crane Global before their team wakes up tomorrow morning. Another pause. Longer this time. Isaiah, we are 14 hours from signing. 14 hours. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? The board has been sitting on this for 8 months. The valuation, I know the valuation. $3 billion. With a B, that's not a number you walk away from over a dinner. It wasn't a dinner. Then tell me what it was. Isaiah looked at Nia, asleep against his arm in the back of the cab. He lowered his voice, not because he was ashamed of what had happened, but because some things deserved to be said quietly. She struck me, Malcolm. The silence this time was different. Absolute, I'm sorry. Say that again. Victoria Crane struck me across the face, in her ballroom, in front of her 400 guests. After ordering security to remove me, my God, my daughter was there. Malcolm didn't say anything for a long moment. Isaiah could hear him breathing the slow, deliberate breathing of a man who was very good at his job, processing something that had very little to do with his job. Isaiah, what do you need right now tonight? What do you need? I need the termination notice drafted and delivered before 6 a.m. Eastern. I need it clean, I need it legal, and I need it done. The board is I know what the board is going to do. They're going to say you're being emotional. They're going to use that word specifically, and I want you to be ready for it. I've been ready for that word my entire career. Malcolm exhaled. Okay, I'm calling Chen right now. We'll have something drafted inside the hour. Isaiah, Malcolm. Yeah. Make sure the language is clean. No emotion, no drama. Just the facts of termination and the contractual basis. I don't want them to be able to read anything into it. Understood. Thank you. He ended the call and put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked out the window at the city. The cab driver hadn't said a word the entire ride. Isaiah appreciated that more than the man would ever know. They pulled up to the house at 12:31. Isaiah paid, carried Nia inside without waking her, navigated the hallway by memory in the dark, and laid her in her bed with the practiced efficiency of 4 years of solo fatherhood. He found her stuffed fox she'd named it Cosmo, after a cartoon character whose name she'd since forgotten, and tucked it under her arm. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. He stood at the edge of her bed for a long moment, watching her breathe. She was the reason for everything. That was a simple fact, not a sentiment, not a father's exaggeration of factual, operational truth. Every decision he had made in the past 4 years, from the board meetings to the patent filings to the overnight grid repairs in February ice storms, every single decision had Nia at the center of it, like a compass needle. She was the direction. He left her door open 3 inches, the way she liked it, and went to his office. The office was modest by any measure that the guests of the Grand Meridian would recognize. A second-hand desk he'd bought at an auction 8 years ago because it was solid and cheap, and he'd needed a surface to work on. A whiteboard along one wall covered in system diagrams and load calculations in 3 different colors of marker. Filing cabinets. A small framed photograph on the desk. Danielle, 8 months pregnant with Nia, laughing at something off camera. Her head thrown back, completely unguarded. He kept it on his desk because he needed to see her laughing every single day. Not grieving. Laughing. He sat down. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't call anyone else. He just sat in the quiet of his office at 12:45 in the morning and let the evening settle over him, the way you let cold water settle, feeling all of it, refusing none of it, and then deciding what to do with it. The slap itself was the smallest part of what had happened. He needed to be clear about that, in his own mind first, before anyone else started shaping the narrative. A slap was a slap. It was an assault, legally and factually, and it would be treated accordingly through proper channels. But a slap was also a symptom, and the disease behind it was the thing that required his full attention. He had spent 15 years building Northstar Energy Systems from a rented bay in a commercial park in southwest Atlanta. He had started with 1 truck, 2 employees, and a design for a grid stability module that every major energy company in the country told him was either impossible or irrelevant or both. He had worked overnight shifts to keep the company liquid in its first 18 months, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and coffee and the particular stubborn fury of a man who has been told no enough times that the word has lost its power over him. He had built a company that now protected the power supply for 17 hospitals, 43 water treatment facilities, and millions of residential customers across 11 states. His technology sat in the infrastructure backbone of cities that had no idea his name existed. That was intentional. He had never needed his name in lights. He needed the system to work. He had survived things that made tonight's gala look mild. He had survived an investor meeting in 2014 where a man in a Brooks Brothers suit had leaned back in his chair and said, with genuine curiosity rather than malice, which was somehow worse, "No offense, but who actually designed the technical components? Your engineers?" Isaiah had designed every component. He had the patents to prove it, 6 of them, all registered under his name. He answered the question without raising his voice and left the meeting without the meaning, and found the funding somewhere else. He had survived the morning in 2017 when 2 police officers stopped him outside his own facility because someone in the neighborhood had called about a suspicious black man in the parking lot. He had shown them his ID, his business card, the facility registration with his name on it. One officer had apologized. The other had not. He had survived the industry conference in 2019 where a competitor, white, Yale-educated, his company's technology 15 years behind Isaiah's, had pulled him aside with the conspiratorial warmth of someone delivering insider information and said, "Just between us, was Northstar part of a diversity initiative? I'm asking because I might be able to recommend you for a grant." Isaiah had looked at the man for exactly 1 second and walked away. He had absorbed all of it, not because it didn't matter, because his employees mattered more, because Nia needed stability, because he understood, with the hard-earned clarity of a man who had been navigating this terrain since childhood, that the cost of reacting in the way those moments deserved loudly, publicly, with the full weight of justified fury was almost always paid not by the created the moment, but by him. He had learned to turn that knowledge into a kind of cold discipline. But sitting alone in his office at 12:50 in the morning, with a swollen lip and his daughter asleep in the next room, he let himself feel what he almost never allowed himself to feel in the presence of other people, the exhaustion of it. The sheer accumulated exhaustion of a lifetime of being required to be twice as good, twice as calm, twice as patient, twice as restrained, in exchange for half the automatic grace that was extended to other people as a matter of course. The exhaustion of walking into rooms where the assumption was wrong and having to quietly correct it, over and over and over, without showing that the correction costs you something every single time. He allowed himself 45 seconds of that. He counted. It was a habit he'd developed years ago. Give the feeling its time, give it respect, and then move. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus Webb, Northstar's CO. Marcus answered on the 4th ring, groggy, confused. "Isaiah? What time? I need you operational by 7 tomorrow. Full leadership team, secure video call. The signing is at 2. Why do we need— There's no signing. A beat. What? The acquisition is terminated. Malcolm is handling the legal paperwork tonight. I need you and the leadership team ready at 7 to begin containment. Board members will start calling by 8 at the latest. I need everyone aligned before that happens, Isaiah." Marcus's voice had shifted entirely. The sleep burned out of it by alarm. "Talk to me. What happened at the gala?" "She assaulted me." "Marcus," the line went quiet. "She Victoria Crane?" "In her ballroom. In front of her guests." "Nia, oh my God." "Isaiah, I'm fine. Nia is fine. I need you focused on tomorrow." "You're not fine. Your lip is." Marcus stopped himself. "How do you know about your lip?" "I can taste it." "Isaiah." 7 o'clock. "Leadership team, secure call. I'll be there." Isaiah, for what it's worth, she picked the wrong man. She had no idea, but she picked the absolute wrong man. Nobody's the right man for that. Marcus. He ended the call. He sat at the desk until after 2 in the morning, reading through documents he had already read 100 times: Crane Global's acquisition plan, the transition timeline, the infrastructure management protocol they proposed for Northstar's network. He had read these documents the way you read something you already suspect has something wrong in it. Slowly, looking for what you might have convinced yourself wasn't there. He found it more easily now. The proposed workforce transition, which used 17 pages to say that 60% of Northstar's field technicians, the people who actually climbed the towers and replaced the components and drove through ice storms at 3 in the morning to restore power to neighborhoods, before the temperature dropped another 10 degrees, would be classified as contract redundant within 18 months of acquisition. They would be offered buyouts or redeployment to aligned service roles, which, on page 11, were defined as commercial district customer service positions. In other words, the people who maintained the systems that kept hospitals and water plants operational would be replaced lower-cost contract workers who had a fraction of their training, because the hospitals and water plants were not in the commercial zones that generated Crane Global's highest profit margins. He had flagged this months ago. He had raised it in 2 negotiation sessions. Crane Global's team had nodded and adjusted language and resubmitted documents that said the same thing in different words. He had let himself believe the adjustments were real because $3 billion has a gravitational pull that bends judgment the way mass bends light. He had wanted to believe it because the number was extraordinary, and because his board believed it, and because after 15 years of building in the dark, part of him had wanted the validation of it. Victoria Crane had done him an accidental service tonight. She had reminded him, in the clearest possible terms, what it looked like when someone decided that other people were disposable. He closed the laptop. He thought about the communities those field technicians served. He thought about the hospital on the west side that had lost power twice in the past decade, once for 11 hours, once for 4, and what those 11 hours had cost in terms of surgical delays, compromised medication storage, ICU strain. He thought about the dialysis center in a neighborhood 12 miles from the Grand Meridian Hotel, where not a single person from that ballroom had probably ever driven. He thought about what would happen to that center's power stability under a management team that had decided its neighborhood was not worth the maintenance cost of experienced technicians. He thought about Danielle. She had grown up in a neighborhood exactly like that one. Her mother had taken 3 buses to get to dialysis twice a week. Isaiah had driven her himself for the last 2 years of her life, before Mrs. Williams passed, because 3 buses was too much at 71 years old with compromised circulation. He was not going to hand his company to Victoria Crane. He was not going to do it for $3 billion, or $30 billion. The number was irrelevant now. He went to check on Nia at 2:15. She had turned onto her side and pulled Cosmo tighter under her arm. She was making the small sound she sometimes made in deep sleep, not quite a word. Just a breath that wanted to be one. He stood in the doorway for a long time. He thought about what she'd asked in the cab. She doesn't know you. She didn't even ask. 7 years old, and she had understood something that Victoria Crane, with all her wealth and all her certainty, had apparently never learned. That you look before you decide. That you ask before you assume. That the person standing in front of you might be carrying something your assumptions have made you completely blind to. He remembered the night Danielle died. He had been 30 years old. Northstar was 2 years old, and Nia was 3 days old. And everything he thought he understood about the structure of the future, the part where Danielle was in it, had come apart in a hospital room at 4 in the morning, with the complication the doctors had caught too late. He had sat in that hospital room for 6 hours after. He hadn't called anyone. He hadn't moved. He had held Nia 3 days old, completely unaware, sleeping in the crook of his left arm, and he had sat with the impossible weight of what had just shifted in the universe. And then he had stood up, because she was 3 days old, and she needed him functional. He had driven home. He had put her in the crib that he and Danielle had assembled together 8 weeks earlier, following instructions they'd laughed about because they were written for people who had never sold anything in their lives. He had stood at the edge of the crib and looked at her for a very long time. And then he had gone to his desk and opened his laptop and done 3 hours of grid system work because the alternative was coming apart, and he could not afford to come apart. 4 years later, he still could not afford to come apart. The architecture of his life was built around that fact. But tonight, standing in his daughter's doorway at 2 in the morning, with a split lip and a terminated acquisition, and a company that would face a board insurrection by 8A, he allowed himself to acknowledge something he almost never said out loud. Even to himself, he was tired. Not of the work. Never of the work. Tired of the weight that existed alongside the work. The constant extra weight. The weight of walking into rooms and knowing that half the people in them had made a decision about him before he opened his mouth. The weight of being required to perform a level of composure under insult that would have been considered extraordinary in anyone and was considered mandatory in him. The weight of raising his daughter to be confident and proud in a world that was going to test that confidence and pride in ways no child should be tested. He was tired of it. He stood in the doorway and let that be true for a moment. Then he went back to his office, poured 2 inches of bourbon. He kept 1 bottle, used it rarely, used it purposefully, sat back down, and started reading again. By the time the sun came up, he had identified 6 specific contractual violations in Crane Global's transition plan that gave Northstar legal standing to walk away without penalty. He had also drafted a preliminary summary of the infrastructure risks that Crane Global's cost-cutting strategy would create, not from emotion, but from engineering analysis, from his own technical assessment of what happens to a load-bearing system when you replace experienced maintenance personnel with cheaper alternatives who lack the institutional knowledge to anticipate failures before they happen. He showered, changed, made Naya breakfast oatmeal with sliced banana, which she would tolerate on weekdays, and orange juice, and had her ready for school 20 minutes before the bus. She climbed onto the stool at the kitchen counter and looked at his lip. It's swollen, I know. Does it hurt? A little. You should put ice on it. I will after you go to school. She ate 3 bites of oatmeal, which was average for a school morning, and looked at him with the particular direct gaze she had inherited from her mother. Daddy, are you okay? He looked at his daughter. Yeah, baby. I am. Are you sure? Because you have the face you make when you're okay, but you're also thinking about something really big. He smiled. The swelling made it slightly lopsided. You know me too well. I've been studying you for 7 years. He laughed. Real unguarded, the kind of laugh that catches you by surprise. I'm okay, he told her. I promise. And today, while you're at school, I'm going to take care of some things. And then tonight, we'll talk. Like we always do. Okay? She considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. Okay, she decided. But I want the big marshmallows tonight. You said we could get them. We will. Promise? Promise. The bus came at 7:42. He watched it until it turned the corner and disappeared. And then he went inside and called Marcus. The 7 o'clock leadership call lasted 2.5 hours. Isaiah laid out everything. The termination, the legal basis, the infrastructure risk analysis, the board response strategy. His leadership team, Marcus, their Chief Technology Officer Priya Sandhu, General Counsel Malcolm Reed, and Director of Operations James Whitfield listened without interrupting except for targeted questions. These were people who had built something real alongside him. They understood what was at stake. The board is going to come at you hard, Marcus warned. Reynolds specifically. He's been the most vocal about the acquisition value. I know. He's going to use the word emotional. I guarantee it. Let him. Marcus. Let him say it. I want it on record. Then I'll respond. Priya, who had been quiet through most of the call, spoke up. Isaiah. I ran secondary analysis on Crane Global's maintenance protocol last night when Marcus texted me. The projections for hospital grid stability under their proposed staffing reductions they're not conservative. They're dangerous. 3 of our hospital partners in the lower service zones would likely see critical failure intervals increase by 30 to 40% within 5 years of transition. I know. I've had similar numbers since August. You've had them since August? I flagged them twice in negotiation. They reworded and resubmitted. A pause on the call. Then you were already. Priya stopped. Started again. You weren't walking away from $3 billion because of what happened at the Gala. No. I was walking away from $3 billion because of what the investigation had already shown me. The Gala just made it impossible to pretend I could fix it from the inside. Another silence. The kind that comes when a room full of intelligent people is reorienting around a new piece of information. Malcolm's voice came through carefully. Isaiah, I need you to understand something about how this is going to be covered. The story that's going to come out is the Gala story. The slap. The security footage. And when that story comes out, and it will, given that 400 people were in that room, every person who wants to explain your decision is going to frame it as a reaction. An emotional reaction to a personal offense. I know. And some of those people are going to say that a reaction like that, walking away from $3 billion, is proof that you let your feelings override your judgment. I know. Malcolm, I just want to be sure I've been black in America for 34 years. I know exactly how this gets framed. And I'm telling you that I need you less worried about the framing and more focused on the documentation. Can you get the Crane Global Maintenance projections, the August negotiation flags, and the engineering risk analysis into an independent report format before the board meeting? How long do I have? 48 hours. That's not a lot of... I know. But the board meeting is in 72 hours, and I need 2 days to prepare my presentation. Okay, I'll need Chen and probably Park from the compliance team. Whatever you need. The call wrapped up at 9:47. Isaiah made 2 more calls, ate half a sandwich standing over his kitchen sink, and then drove to Northstar's main facility in southwest Atlanta, the same commercial park where he had started with 1 truck and 2 employees 12 years ago. He walked the floor. He did this sometimes when he needed to think, walked the actual physical space of the company, past the engineering bays and the control room and the dispatch center where the field technicians got their assignments every morning. He had never stopped needing to see it. The actual thing. Not the spreadsheets, not the board reports, the actual technicians and engineers and dispatchers who made the system work. James caught up with him near the control room. You should see the news. What's running? A witness posted a video clip from the Gala last night. It's partial, you can't see the strike itself, but you can see the moment right before and right after. It's trending in 6 cities. Isaiah stopped. Who posted it? Anonymous account. Posted at 4 a.m. Someone who was in the room and had a phone and a conscience. What's the coverage saying? Right now it's mostly speculation. Nobody knows who you are yet. You're being described as an unidentified black man and his young daughter. Crane Global hasn't commented. Victoria Crane's PR team released a statement saying the incident has been mischaracterized and they're looking into the matter. Isaiah thought about that for a moment. How long before someone identifies me? Given who was in that room? 12 hours. Maybe less. And when that happens? James looked at him steadily. When that happens, you're not the unidentified black man anymore. You're the founder of Northstar Energy Systems. And the story becomes something different. Isaiah nodded slowly. Pull security footage from our side, the footage from my key fob access, my parking entry, everything that establishes my presence at Northstar yesterday and this morning. Timestamped. I want a clear record of where I've been and when, so nobody can reconstruct the timeline incorrectly. Done. Isaiah, James hesitated. How are you holding up? I'm functional. That's not what I asked. Isaiah looked at him. James Whitfield had been with Northstar for 9 years. He had been there through the years after Danielle. He had showed up at the house with groceries twice unannounced. No big production about it. Just groceries on the porch because Isaiah had forgotten to eat in the weeks after the funeral. He was that kind of person. I'm tired, James. But I'm clear. I want you to know I'm clear. This isn't about anger. I know. I need the people in this building to know that. I need them to understand that this decision was made from evidence, not emotion, that they have a leader who is operating with full information and full judgment. They know, Isaiah, these people have watched you build this thing for years. They trust you. Isaiah looked through the glass at the control room, the dispatchers at their stations, the screens showing load maps for 11 states, the lights blinking green across the entire network. Nobody loses power today, he said quietly. Whatever else is happening, the board, the press, Crane Global, nobody loses power today. Nobody ever does, James said. That's the whole point of you. Isaiah's phone vibrated in his pocket. He looked at it. A number he didn't recognize. Then a text from Malcolm a second later. That's Crane Global's legal team. They've been trying you since 8. Don't answer until we talk. He put the phone back in his pocket. He had an independent report to prepare, a board to face, and a daughter who needed big marshmallows for her hot chocolate. He had work to do. 40 miles away, in a corner office on the 28th floor of Crane Global's headquarters, Victoria Crane sat behind a glass desk and stared at a tablet screen showing 12 seconds of shaky video footage. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt the specific cold that comes when you realize the ground beneath a decision has shifted and you don't yet know how far. Julian Cross, her chief operating officer, stood on the other side of the desk, with unfolded in front of him, in the posture of a man who has practiced delivering bad news and still doesn't love doing it. "Tell me again," Victoria said. Not because she hadn't heard the first time, because she needed the information to reorganize itself inside her head around the reality she was only now beginning to accept. Isaiah Bennett, founder, chief engineer, and controlling shareholder of Northstar Energy Systems. He has held a 62% controlling stake since the company's Series B funding in 2017. Every patent in Northstar's core technology portfolio is registered under his name. The acquisition contract we've been negotiating for 8 months required his personal signature as the controlling shareholder. Without his signature, there is no deal. The room was quiet. And the termination notice? Delivered at 5:47 this morning. Our legal team has reviewed it. It's clean. There are no procedural grounds to contest it. Victoria set the tablet down on the desk. She looked out the window at the city below. Julian waited. How many people in that room knew who he was? We're still assessing. Our guest list included several energy industry contacts who would have been familiar with his name. Whether any of them recognized him in person, without the context of knowing he'd be there, Julian paused. It's hard to say. What about the video? Currently at 400,000 views and accelerating. The partial clip doesn't show your face clearly, but the staff who were in the room know what happened. And 400 guests. I know how many guests were there. Julian. Another pause. We borrowed against the Northstar acquisition to finance 2 other projects, Victoria said. The Meridian infrastructure deal and the Harlow-Kirschel build-out. Yes. Without the Northstar revenue. Our liquidity position. Our finance team is modeling scenarios now. It's not a comfortable picture, Victoria. She was quiet for a long time. Julian had worked with Victoria Crane for 11 years. He had watched her make decisions that other executives wouldn't touch. He had watched her outmaneuver competitors, outlast board challenges, rebuild after 2 market downturns. She was one of the most capable operational minds he had ever worked alongside. He had also watched her, over 11 years, treat certain people as though their presence in her orbit was an imposition rather than a contribution. He had filed that observation away each time, and said nothing, and told himself it was not his place, and moved on. He was not moving on this time, Victoria. She looked at him. I have to be honest with you about something. Then be honest. What you did last night, not just the strike, the whole of it, from the moment that child bumped the table. What you did was not an aberration. It was consistent with a pattern of behavior that your senior team has observed for years and has not felt safe enough to name. Victoria's expression didn't change. I'm naming it now, Julian continued, because I think you deserve someone telling you the truth, before this becomes something none of us can manage. Last night did not create this problem. Last night made it visible. And the man who is now on the other side of a terminated $3 billion deal, he was never the threat. We were. Victoria looked at him for a long time. Then she turned back to the window. Get me his address, Victoria, not to send legal. I'm going myself. Julian opened his mouth, closed it, looked at her face. That's I would strongly advise against Bates. Get me the address. Julian. He got her the address. She showed up at 9:43 in the morning. Isaiah was in the driveway, crouched beside Nia's bicycle with a wrench in his hand, when the Blacktown car pulled up to the curb. He had promised Nia the night before the gala, before all of it, that he would fix the rear brake before the weekend. He was a man who kept his promises to his daughter, Terd, regardless of what else was happening in his life. The bike brake did not care about terminated acquisitions. He heard the car door. He kept working. He heard heels on the sidewalk, that particular sound, confident and deliberate, the walk of a woman who had never in her adult life second-guessed where she was going. He heard it stop at the edge of his driveway. He finished tightening the bolt, tested the brake lever with his thumb, stood up. Victoria Crane was standing at the end of his driveway in a charcoal suit. No jewelry except small pearl earrings, no sunglasses. She looked like a woman who had made a deliberate decision about what to wear to a confrontation. She also looked like a woman who had not slept. Isaiah looked at her. He looked at the town car behind her, the driver visible behind the wheel. He looked back at her. He didn't say anything. "I came without lawyers," Victoria said. "I can see that. I'd like to talk." "You're talking." She looked at the bicycle, at the wrench in his hand, at his house, an ordinary suburban house. Nothing that matched what her financial team had presumably told her about his net worth. He watched her absorb the gap between what she'd expected and what she was looking at, and he watched her decide not to comment on it. "May I come inside?" "No." A pause. She accepted it, with only a slight tightening around her eyes. "Then I'll say what I came to say here." "That's fine." She straightened. There was something almost formal about the way she composed herself, the way you compose yourself when you've prepared a speech and the setting is not what you rehearsed. "What I did last night was wrong. It was beneath any standard I hold myself to, and it was wrong. I want to say that to you directly." Isaiah looked at her. "Okay." She waited, as if she expected something more from him. He didn't offer it. "I also came because I believe there's still a path forward for both of us. For our companies, for the communities that Northstar serves, for the employees on both sides who have how much?" She stopped. "I'm sorry, the offer. You came with one. How much?" Something shifted in her expression. A recalibration. "I'm prepared to add $250 million to the acquisition price, and I'm prepared to establish in Nia's name a scholarship foundation for young women in engineering. Fully funded. $20 million. She paused. "And I'm prepared to offer a private settlement for what occurred. A figure that would reflect the serious. No, the settlement alone would be." "I heard you. The answer is no." She looked at him carefully. The look of a woman trying to locate the problem, the variable, the specific thing that needed adjustment. "Isaiah, I want to fix this." "You can't fix this with a number." "Then tell me what it would take. Tell me specifically, and I will." "Victoria." He said her name the way he would say it to any colleague, not cruelly, not warmly, just plainly. "You came here to buy my silence. You're not buying it with a scholarship, and you're not buying it with a settlement, and you're not buying it with $250 million on top of $3 billion. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He set the wrench down on the concrete and looked at her directly. "Last night you looked at me and you decided in about 4 seconds, without asking a single question, that I was someone who didn't belong in that room. And when I didn't behave the way you expected someone like me to behave, you escalated. You sent security instead of speaking to me yourself. You called my daughter a situation, and when I held my ground, you hit me. I know what I'm not finished." She went quiet. "None of that started with the tart. It started when a security guard checked my invitation twice, while white guests walked through without question. It started when your guest handed me empty glasses and asked whether I'd come through the service entrance. It started with the entire architecture of that room, which was designed not consciously maybe, but absolutely to tell certain people they didn't belong. And you didn't build that in one night. You've been building that for years. In your boardroom, in your offices, in the way your management team treats the people at the bottom of your company who make everything run." Victoria was very still. "My legal team has already begun an independent review of Crane Global's workplace practices," Isaiah continued. "Not because I want to destroy your company. Because before last night, I had myself half convinced that the cultural problems inside Crane Global were fixable from the sense inside if I structured the acquisition correctly. Last night convinced me I was wrong. And the documents your team submitted, the transition plan, the maintenance protocols, those convinced me even further." Something changed in her eyes. A different kind of alertness. "What documents specifically?" "The ones that show 60% of Northstar's field technicians classified as contract redundant within 18 months of acquisition. The ones that show service center closures in lower income districts. The ones that show reduced maintenance inspection intervals for grid infrastructure in non-commercial zones." He looked at her steadily. You came here expecting a man who was angry about being hit. I'm not angry about being hit. I'm concerned about what happens to the dialysis center on the west side when your cost-cutting strategy removes the experienced technicians who maintain its power supply. Victoria said nothing for a long moment. If those documents become part of litigation discovery, Isaiah said, your board will have questions that go well beyond a failed acquisition. Is that a threat? It's information. There's a difference. And I think you know the difference, even if last night suggested otherwise. The driver in the town car shifted slightly, visible through the windshield. Victoria didn't look back at him. You're not doing this because of the slap, she said. Her voice had changed, the prepared speech quality was gone. This was something closer to genuine. No. You were already walking away. I was already concerned. Last night made the decision clear. She looked at him for a long time. The sun was fully up now, cutting across the driveway at a sharp autumn angle. She looked different in daylight than she had in the ballroom, less constructed. More like a person. The scholarship, she said quietly. Whatever you decide about the acquisition, Nia's name on a foundation. That offer stands. Not as a settlement. Just as a separate thing. Isaiah looked at her. You think my daughter needs her name on a building that you built? Victoria absorbed that. No, she said after a moment. I suppose she doesn't. What she needs, Isaiah said, is to grow up, knowing that her father didn't compromise what he built because someone offered him enough zeros to make the compromise feel like a decision. That's what she needs. He picked up the wrench. I'm going to finish this break. And then I'm going to go prepare for a board meeting that is going to be one of the more unpleasant experiences of my professional life. And you're going to go deal with whatever is waiting for you on your end, which I suspect is considerable. Victoria stood at the edge of his driveway for one more second. For what it's worth, she said. I didn't know who you were. I know. I mean, if I had known, stop. His voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. That's the part that you need to sit with. Not the not knowing. The fact that you think the not knowing explains it. It doesn't. If I'd been exactly who you thought I was, just a man in a rented tuxedo who wandered into the wrong event, your behavior still would have been wrong. You understand that, right? That's the thing you need to understand. She looked at him. He could not tell from her face whether she understood it or not. He could not tell whether the thing she was feeling was genuine remorse or the particular discomfort of a powerful person being told something true that cost them money. Maybe it was both. Maybe those things were not as separate as they seemed. Go home, Miss Crane, he said. Not dismissively. Just plainly. She walked back to the town car. Got in. The door closed. The car pulled away from the curb and moved down the street and turned the corner and was gone. Isaiah crouched back down beside the bicycle. He finished the brake adjustment, tested it 4 times, set the bicycle carefully against the garage wall. Then he went inside and called Malcolm. She was here. I know. Julian called me 40 minutes ago. She went against my specific recommendation, for what it's worth. She offered $250 on top of the acquisition price and a private settlement. What did you say? Malcolm. A beat. Okay. The board meeting is confirmed for Thursday. Reynolds has been calling every director individually. I'm getting reports of the calls as they happen. He's framing the termination as a mental health crisis. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He's saying what? He hasn't used those words exactly. But the implication is that you suffered a trauma last night and made a decision under emotional duress that doesn't reflect your actual judgment. He's building a case for a competency challenge. The cold that moved through Isaiah was not anger. It was recognition. He had known, from the moment he'd made the call to Malcolm at midnight, that this was coming. He had known it the way you know a storm is coming when the pressure drops and the birds go quiet. How many directors is he reaching? At least 6 of the 9 independent seats. He's not touching Priya or Marcus because he knows they'll hold. He's going after the outside directors. What's his majority threshold for a competency challenge? 2/3. He needs 6 of the 9 independent seats, plus the 2 investor seats. If he gets the investor seats, he won't get the investor seats. You sound very certain. Because the 2 investor seat holders have both been inside Northstar's facilities. They've met the field team. They've read the engineering reports. They are not going to vote to remove the man who built the system they've been invested in for 7 years over one canceled acquisition. Malcolm, Reynolds doesn't have the investors. What if he has something else? What if he goes to the press first, frames the story before you can frame it yourself? Then he frames it. I'm not managing the narrative. I'm managing the company. When I walk into that board meeting, I'm walking in with evidence, engineering analysis, risk projections, the Crane Global Maintenance documents, and the full independent workplace review. I'm not asking the board to trust my feelings. I'm asking them to read a report. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. You've been preparing this since August. Since August. You never said anything. I didn't want to prejudice the negotiation until I had complete documentation. And I didn't want to kill a $3 billion deal on incomplete information. That would have been the emotionally driven decision. Another pause on the line. Longer, Isaiah. I owe you an apology. For what? For the things I said on the phone last night. About the board being furious. About the valuation. About, you were doing your job, I was. But I also, when you told me what she did, my first instinct was to think about the deal. Before I thought about you. And I'm sorry for that. Isaiah stood in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, and looked at Danielle's photo on the desk, through the office doorway. You're a good lawyer and a good man, Malcolm, he said. Prepare the board presentation. I'll be there Thursday. He spent the rest of the day at Northstar, working with Priya on the engineering risk report and with James on the logistics of whatever post-board meeting reality was to emerge from Thursday. He ate dinner at his desk. He picked up Nia at after-school care at 5:30. She climbed into the car and immediately looked at his face. Still swollen, a little. Did you put ice on it? I did. Good, she clicked her seatbelt. Marshmallows? Marshmallows. They stopped at the grocery store. Nia picked the big marshmallows, the kind that come in a bag with a cartoon on it and are approximately the size of a golf ball, and then, while Isaiah was getting milk, she added a box of hot chocolate mix to the cart with the quiet efficiency of a child who knows exactly which items her father forgets. At home, they made hot chocolate together. Nia did the stirring, which she considered an important responsibility. Isaiah made toast with cinnamon butter, which was the only thing either of them felt like eating. They sat at the kitchen table, and Nia told him about her day, a spelling test she felt good about, a disagreement with her best friend Maya that had been resolved by recess, a caterpillar someone found on the playground that everyone argued about whether to keep. He listened to every word. This was the part of the day he protected more fiercely than any board meeting, any investor call, any legal proceeding. This 20 minutes at the kitchen table, the two of them, her voice filling the room with the ordinary texture of a 7-year-old's world. He would not trade it for anything the Grand Meridian had to offer. When the hot chocolate was half finished, Nia looked at him with the look. Okay, she said. Tell me the big thing. What big thing, Daddy? I've been studying you for 7 years. There's a big thing. He looked at his daughter. He thought about how to explain it, the acquisition, the board meeting, the public story that was about to break fully in the next 24 hours, Sachwin. He thought about what she actually needed to understand. Not the legal structure, not the business mechanics. The thing underneath. You know the woman from last night? He began. Nia's face went carefully neutral, the expression of a child bracing. Yes. She came to the house this morning. Nia sat up straight. Here? She came here? She wanted to talk. What did she want? She offered to pay money. A lot of money. To make what happened go away. Nia thought about this with visible concentration. Did you take it? No. Why not? He leaned forward, both elbows on the table. Because taking money to stay quiet about something wrong isn't fixing the wrong. It's just making it comfortable. You understand the difference? She thought about it. Like when Jake at school broke my pencil case and then gave me his extra eraser and misses. Patterson said that made it even? Did that feel even to you? No. Because he broke my pencil case on purpose, and then the eraser was old. Right. An apology and a replacement are two different things. And a payment to stop you from talking about something is different from both. Nia nodded slowly. Processing. So what happens now? Now I go to a meeting with the people who have a say in how my company is run, and I tell them the truth about why I made the decision I made. And some of them are going to be upset. And I'm going to have to stand in front of them and hold my ground. Are you scared? A little. But you're going to do it anyway. Always. She drank the last of her hot chocolate. A marshmallow had survived intact, and she ate it whole. An act of pure 7-year-old commitment. Daddy. Yeah. Would she have hit you if she knew you were important? The question landed on him like a physical weight. He had known it was coming, had felt it building across the entire evening. Ever since she'd asked about the woman at dinner, 3 days ago before the gala, when he was explaining why he was going and why it mattered. He had known, knowing Nia, that she would eventually ask the exact question that cut through every layer of complexity to the bone of the thing. He sat with it for a moment. No, he said honestly. Probably not. That's wrong. It is. You were important before she knew it. Yes. So she should have treated you right before she knew it. That's the part that was wrong. Not just the hitting. Isaiah looked at his daughter across the kitchen table in the ordinary light of an ordinary Tuesday evening and felt something move through him that he couldn't have named to anyone in the Northstar boardroom or the Grand Meridian Hotel, something that was grief and gratitude and fierce love all compressed into one feeling, with no word in English large enough to contain it. That's exactly the part that was wrong, he said. You just said it better than I've been able to say it all day. I told you. 7 years, he laughed. She took her mug to the sink, rinsed it the way he'd taught her, and turned around. I'm going to do my homework. And then can we watch something? 1 episode. School night. 2. 1. 1.5. There's no such thing as 1.5 episodes. You could pause it in the middle. Go do your homework, she went. He heard her settle into her room, heard the familiar sounds of books being opened, and her quiet habit of talking to herself, while she worked a habit she had inherited from Danielle, who used to narrate her, thinking out loud without realizing she was doing it. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table, with his cooling hot chocolate and his cinnamon toast and his daughter's question. You were important before she knew it. So she should have treated you right before she knew it. He wrote it down on the notepad he kept on the counter. Not because he was going to quote a 7-year-old in a board meeting, but because it was true, and he needed to keep it in front of him for the days ahead. He thought about Reynolds and the competency challenge. He thought about the boardroom, the faces of 9 independent directors who had been quietly lobbied by a frightened man with a lot of money at stake. He thought about standing at the head of that table and making the case not for himself, but for every field technician on Northstar's payroll, and every hospital that depended on their expertise, and every dialysis patient in every low-income neighborhood whose continued existence was quietly dependent on a power grid that Crane Global's cost-cutting strategy would have slowly degraded. He thought about what Priya had said on the call that morning. Then you were already walking away. He had been. But he had also, until last night, been allowing himself the comfortable possibility that he was wrong, that he had misread the documents, that the flags he'd raised in negotiation had been heard, that Crane Global's culture could be reformed from the inside if he structured the contract carefully enough. Victoria's behavior at the gala had not made him angry. It had made him certain. There was a difference. He understood that distinction precisely because he had spent his entire career learning it. Anger is a response to injury. Certainty is a response to clarity. Anger makes you want to damage the thing that damaged you. Certainty makes you want to protect the thing that matters. He was not walking into that board meeting damaged. He was walking in clear. His phone buzzed. Marcus. It's out. Full identification. Story went national 20 minutes ago. Your name? Northstar. Crane Global. The footage. All of it. Isaiah read the text. Put the phone down. Picked it up again. How bad? Marcus's reply came in under 30 seconds. Depends on your definition. Crane Global stock is down 9%. Your phones are going to be unusable by morning. But Isaiah, people are angry in a way I haven't seen in a long time. Not at you, for you. This is the response is something. Isaiah set the phone down on the table. He looked at Danielle's photo through the office doorway. He had spent his career avoiding exactly this, the public story, the narrative, the version of his life that lived in other people's mouths. He had refused to use his race as a marketing tool, refused to perform his grief for investor sympathy, refused to let the story of what he'd survived become the reason people trusted him. He wanted them to trust him because his systems worked, because the lights stayed on. Now the story was out, and it was going to be 10 times larger than anything he could have controlled. And it was going to live in a news cycle for as long as news cycles lasted. And people were going to have opinions about him and his daughter and his dead wife and his company that he had never given anyone permission to have. He was not ready for that. He was also, he recognized, not particularly afraid of it. He had survived things that were harder than being seen. He got up from the table, checked on Nia already deep in her homework. Cosmo, the fox, sitting on the desk beside her math worksheet, and went to his office. He sat down at the desk, opened his laptop, pulled up the board presentation Priya had been building. He worked for 4 hours. At midnight he went to bed. At 7:12 the next morning, his phone had 47 missed calls, 316 text messages, and a voicemail from a senator he had met once at an infrastructure conference who wanted to speak about the broader implications. He made Nia oatmeal with sliced banana. He drove her to school. When she climbed out of the car, she turned back and looked at him through the open door. "Daddy, whatever happens at the meeting, yeah? You already did the right thing. The meeting is just the rest of them catching up." She closed the car door and walked into school. He sat in the car for a moment. Then he drove to Northstar. He had a board to face. The boardroom was on the 6th floor of Northstar's main facility, a room Isaiah had designed himself, with windows facing the engineering bays, rather than the street, so that whoever sat at that table could see the actual work being done below. It was a deliberate choice. He had always wanted his board to remember that the decisions they made in this room had physical consequences in the room below it. 11 directors, 9 independent seats, 2 investor representatives, plus Isaiah as founder and controlling shareholder, and Malcolm on his right as general counsel. Reynolds was already seated when Isaiah walked in. Gordon Reynolds, 71 years old, white hair, the particular posture of a man who had sat at enough boardroom tables to believe he owned them by default. He had been on Northstar's board for 6 years. He had voted against Isaiah twice on matters of compensation and once on a geographic expansion. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had confused his preference for Isaiah's decision with the actual merits of Isaiah's decision, which was a common mistake among people who had never built anything from nothing. Reynolds looked at Isaiah when he walked in and said nothing. His expression was the expression of a man who had decided this meeting was already won. Isaiah sat down. He opened his laptop. He looked around the table. "Before we begin," he said, "I'd like to invite some additional attendees into the room." Reynolds straightened. "The agenda doesn't include. The agenda is mine to set. Gordon. I'm the one who called this meeting." He nodded to Malcolm, who opened the boardroom door. In walked Priya Sandhu, James Whitfield, 3 of Northstar's senior field technicians men who had been with the company for 8, 11, and 13 years respectively, who had driven through ice storms and climbed towers at 4 in the morning and kept the system running through 2 hurricanes and 1 historic freeze. Behind them came the chief of engineering at St. Catherine's Hospital, a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, who had worked with Northstar's grid systems for 7 years. And behind her, 2 residents of the Carver Heights neighborhood on the west side, one of them the manager of the dialysis center, whose power supply ran on Northstar's infrastructure. Reynolds watched all of them take seats along the wall. "Isaiah, this is highly irregular, Gordon. I'm about to ask this board to make a decision about a $3 billion acquisition. I want the people most affected by that decision in the room when we make it. That seems entirely regular to me." He let the silence settle. Then he opened the presentation. "Let me show you what Crane Global actually planned to do with what we built." The first slide was a map. 11 dates. Thousands of grid nodes represented by small dots, blue for operational, red for critical infrastructure, yellow for residential zones with elevated vulnerability risk, hospitals, water treatment plants, dialysis centers, emergency services. The physical scope of what Northstar's technology protected rendered in color across a map that made the room go quiet before Isaiah said a single word. He let them look at it for 15 seconds. He had learned, across years of presentations to people who thought in numbers rather than consequences, that 15 seconds of silence in front of a map was worth more than 5 minutes of explanation. Then he advanced to the next slide. This is Crane Global's proposed maintenance staffing model, 18 months post-acquisition. What you're looking at is a 62% reduction in experienced field technicians across the southern and western service zones. These are the zones that cover 14 of our 17 hospital partners and 31 of our 43 water treatment facilities. Reynolds shifted in his seat. Isaiah, the staffing projections were part of a preliminary transition framework. Those numbers were subject to negotiation, Gordon. I raised this in negotiation twice, in August and again in October. Both times, Crane Global's team resubmitted documents with adjusted language that described the same reduction in different words. He advanced the slide. Here is the August version. Here is the October version. I've highlighted the relevant sections. The workforce reduction is identical. Only the terminology changed. The room was quiet. He advanced again. This is a failure probability model developed by Priya Sandhu and our engineering team. It projects what happens to grid stability in our critical infrastructure zones if you replace experienced field technicians, people with 8 to 13 years of institutional knowledge about these specific systems, with lower-cost contract workers who have standard industry certifications but no system-specific training. Priya spoke from her seat along the wall. The model is conservative. We used industry-standard assumptions and gave Crane Global's proposing the most favorable possible interpretation. Under those conservative assumptions, critical failure intervals for hospital-grade infrastructure increase by 31% within 3 years of transition and 44% within 5 years. What does that mean in practical terms? One of the investor directors asked. His name was Franklin Cho, and he had been quiet since Isaiah walked in, which Isaiah had taken as a good sign. Quiet in Franklin Cho's case usually meant he was listening rather than defending a position he'd already formed. Isaiah nodded to the third field technician along the wall, a man named Darnell Washington, 13 years with Northstar, who had driven through a Category 2 hurricane to restore power to pediatric ICU in 2021. Darnell. Tell them about Southeastern Memorial. 2021. Darnell leaned forward in his chair. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with hands that showed the kind of work that doesn't wash off entirely. Hurricane Ida came through on a Tuesday. We lost 4 major nodes in the southern grid by Wednesday morning. I got the call at 2 a.m. I drove 90 minutes through conditions that had the roads closed to civilian traffic. Got to the hospital's external relay station, and I had to make a judgment call on the fly, the manual override sequence for that specific relay model, in those specific weather conditions, with that specific configuration of backup load. That call took 30 seconds to make. I made it correctly because I had worked that relay station seven times over 3 years, and I knew its behavior. The room was completely still. If I make that call wrong, Darnell continued, the hospital loses power for a minimum of 4 hours while the full diagnostic sequence runs. 4 hours in a pediatric ICU during a hurricane. I'm not going to tell you what happens inside those 4 hours because the doctors in this room understand it better than I do. Dr. Patricia Osi, seated beside him, nodded once. Slowly. A contract worker with standard certification, Darnell said, would not have made that call in 30 seconds. They might have made it correctly eventually, but not in 30 seconds. And in some situations, eventually is the wrong timeline. Franklin Cho looked at Isaiah. This was in the acquisition documentation? The risk analysis was flagged internally in August. I did not include it in the acquisition documentation at that time because I was still in active negotiation and I believed the staffing model could be corrected. I was wrong about that, and I accept responsibility for not escalating it sooner. Reynolds spoke again, and this time his voice had shifted, less certain, more careful. Isaiah, I want to be clear that nothing I've said to other board members was intended to question your integrity. My concern was purely about the financial consequences of terminating at this stage. I know, Gordon. The competency question that was raised by others. I want that understood. It was raised in calls that you made, Gordon. Reynolds's jaw tightened. I was conveying concern from multiple. I'm not here to relitigate those calls. I'm here to show this board what the acquisition would have cost us that isn't measured in dollars. After that, I'm going to use my controlling vote to permanently terminate the Crane Global acquisition. And then I'm going to present an alternative path for Northstar that I believe serves this company, our employees, and the communities we exist to protect. You can vote against it. You have that right. But I want you to do it knowing everything I know. He advanced the slide. This is Earl Morrison. He runs the dialysis center on West Carver in the district our infrastructure serves. Earl Morrison was in his late 50s, a compact man in a button-down shirt who sat with his hands folded on his knees with the particular dignity of someone who is not accustomed to boardrooms and has decided to treat the unfamiliarity as irrelevant. Mr. Morrison, Isaiah said, tell the board what you told me. Earl looked around the table. He took a breath. We've got 43 patients. They come in 3 times a week. Most of them are over 60. Most of them take 3-4 buses to get there because they can't drive anymore, and the medical transport is unreliable. Dialysis is not optional. You miss a session, your body starts poisoning itself. It's that simple, he paused. 2 years ago, we had a partial outage. 4 hours. We had backup generation that held for 2 of those hours. For the other 2 hours, we manually managed 11 patients through interrupted treatment. 1 patient was hospitalized afterward. Not because of the treatment itself, because of the stress of the interruption on a body that was already at its limit. He looked at Isaiah. Northstar called me personally when the outage started. Your team was on site within 90 minutes. 4 hours total. I was told that with the previous infrastructure management company, that type of outage ran an average of 7 to 9 hours. He looked back at the board. I don't know anything about acquisitions or stock valuations. I know that your people show up, and I know that for my patients, the difference between 4 hours and 9 hours is not abstract. The room was silent for a long moment. Reynolds had stopped shifting. He was looking at the map on the screen with an expression Isaiah couldn't fully read, something between discomfort and something approaching recognition. Isaiah advanced the slide one more time. This slide was simple. Black text on white background. No graphs, no models, no maps. It was Nia's question. Would she still have hit you if she knew you were important? He had not planned to use it. He had written the presentation entirely around the engineering analysis and the risk documentation. But at 11 o'clock the night before, sitting at his desk with the final version of the slides in front of him, he had thought about what Nia had said and what he had told her, and what the board needed to understand that the engineering analysis alone couldn't convey. He left it in. He looked at the 11 faces around the table. My daughter asked me that question 2 nights ago. She's 7 years old. She wanted to know whether the outcome would have been different if Victoria Crane had known who I was before she decided what I was. He paused. The honest answer is yes. Probably not. And that is not a complicated insight. It's a simple one. A child arrived at it in under 24 hours. But I want this board to sit with what it means. He looked at Reynolds. Because the same logic that allowed Victoria Crane to look at a black man in a rented tuxedo and conclude he was less than, that same logic is embedded in Crane Global's acquisition plan. The same certainty that some people's presence requires justification while others is assumed. The same confidence that the communities we serve in the lower service zones are acceptable losses in a cost-cutting model. It is the same thing, it manifests differently. But the root is identical. He closed the laptop. I'm not asking this board to make a decision based on what happened to me at a hotel gala. I'm asking you to make a decision based on 17 hospitals and 43 water treatment facilities and 43 dialysis patients on West Carver who take 4 buses to keep themselves alive. I'm asking you to make a decision based on Darnell Washington driving through a hurricane at 2 in the morning because he knows these systems the way a doctor knows a patient. I'm asking you to make a decision based on 15 years of building something that works. He looked around the table one final time. "I have a controlling vote. I'm going to use it. I wanted you to know why before I did." No one spoke. Isaiah looked at Franklin Cho. Franklin Cho looked at the map still visible in the lower corner of the darkened slide. Then he looked at Isaiah. "I'm with you," Franklin said. For the record, the vote was not close. Reynolds voted against. 2 of the independent directors he had lobbied voted against. The remaining 6 independents and both investor seats voted with Isaiah. The Crane Global acquisition was permanently terminated at 11:47 a.m. on a Thursday in November. Isaiah thanked the board. He shook hands with Franklin Cho and with the 6 directors who had voted with him. He nodded to Reynolds, who accepted the nod with the stiff grace of a man who knew he had lost and was recalibrating his position accordingly. As the room cleared, Darnell Washington stopped beside Isaiah on his way to the door. He didn't say anything immediately. He just looked at Isaiah with the direct, unperformed gaze of a man who had been doing hard work for a long time and recognized the same quality in another person. 13 years, Darnell said finally. "I know. You never once came to the floor and made it feel like I was doing you a favor by being there." Isaiah looked at him. "You were never doing me a favor, Darnell. I was doing mine." Darnell nodded, extended his hand. Isaiah shook it. Then Darnell walked out, and Isaiah stood alone in the boardroom for a moment, looking at the map still on the screen, all those blue and red and yellow dots across 11 states, and felt something release in his chest that had been compressed for longer than he could pinpoint. It was not relief exactly. It was something quieter. The specific feeling of having held something precious through a storm and finding it intact on the other side. He picked up his laptop and left. The next 72 hours were unlike anything Isaiah had navigated before, and he had navigated things that would have broken most people. The story had gone fully national, not just the Gala footage, but the deeper context, Northstar's technology, Crane Global's financial exposure, the terminated acquisition. News organizations that had never previously reported on energy infrastructure were running segments on grid vulnerability. Business outlets were running analyses of the acquisition collapse with headlines that swung between billionaire founder walks from 3B deal after assault and was Crane Global's acquisition, always doomed. His publicist, a woman named Asha, who had been trying to get him to be more public about Northstar for 3 years, called at 6:30 in the morning, the day after the board vote. "You have requests from 47 media outlets. 6 of them are broadcast. No, Isaiah, no interviews. No statements beyond the legal filing. The legal filing is already public. The assault charge, I know. Malcolm handled the release. The assault charge is generating its own separate news cycle. Isaiah, if you don't give a statement, other people will give one for you. They already are. Let them. Some of them are not being generous. Some of them never are. Asha, I appreciate what you're trying to do. The answer is no. Not because I'm hiding. Because I don't want this to be entertainment. My daughter's face is in some of that footage, and I will not turn what happened to her father into content." A pause. "Okay," Asha said, "I hear you. What do you want me to do?" "Draft a single written statement. Short, no emotion, no drama. State the facts of the legal filing. State that Northstar's operations are unaffected and all service commitments are being met. And state that I'm not granting interviews at this time. And Crane Global? Not my story to tell. Crane Global's story was telling itself. Within 48 hours of the board vote, 17 of Crane Global's own employees had contacted journalists with accounts of workplace discrimination, retaliatory management practices, and a culture of institutional silence that they described as having been built and protected by Victoria Crane personally. 3 of the accounts involved direct interactions with Victoria. 4 involved management directives that employees said came from the executive level and created environments where they were afraid to report discrimination through official channels. Julian Cross gave a statement to the Wall Street Journal that was carefully worded but unmistakable in its implication. Crane Global's board had been aware of concerns about the company's workplace culture and had not addressed them adequately. The statement was widely read as Julian, positioning himself as the adult in the room, in anticipation of what was coming. What was coming arrived on a Friday. Crane Global's board voted to place Victoria in an indefinite leave of absence, pending an independent investigation. The language was corporate and bloodless, the way these things always are. But the meaning was plain. Isaiah heard about it from Marcus, who forwarded him the press release with a single line of text. "It's done." He read the press release, set his phone down, thought about how he felt. He had expected something satisfaction. Vindication, the particular relief of a wrong being corrected. What he actually felt was more complicated and more subdued. Something closer to sorrow than triumph. Because Victoria Crane being removed from her company was not, in any meaningful sense, a resolution. It was a consequence. And consequences, even just ones, did not repair the chain of assumptions that had made the action possible, did not restore the years of silence from the employees who had been afraid to speak, did not give back the 4 minutes at the Grand Meridian that Nia had spent watching her father absorb what a powerful woman decided he deserved. He was not glad Victoria Crane was suffering. He was not able to pretend he was entirely indifferent to it, either. He called Asha. "Draft a second statement. Different from the first one. What do you want it to say?" He thought for a moment. "Say that I'm aware of the Crane Global Board's decision. Say that I believe accountability is appropriate and necessary. Say that I ask the public and the press not to use this moment as an opportunity for harassment or personal attack against Ms. Crane or her family. And say that I hope the independent investigation leads to real structural change at Crane Global, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of the employees who deserve a safe place to work." Silence on the line. "You're protecting her." "I'm not protecting her. I'm refusing to celebrate her." "Those are different things." "Isaiah, the woman hit you. I know what she did. And I also know that watching someone be publicly destroyed isn't justice. It's just a different kind of spectacle. I'm not interested in spectacles. I never have been." Asha was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll draft it." The statement ran that afternoon. The response to it was predictably mixed. Some people called it gracious. Some called it naive. Some called it a calculated PR move. Some called it exactly what it was, a man who had spent his life having to be twice as controlled in the face of twice as much provocation, choosing to continue being that man, even when the situation finally gave him permission not to be. Isaiah didn't read the responses. He had made a decision he could live with, and he had learned long ago that decisions you make for yourself are much lighter to carry than decisions you make for an audience. 3 days after Victoria's leave of absence was announced, she called him. He almost didn't answer. He stood in his kitchen looking at the screen with her name on it. She had texted first, asking if she could call, and he had not responded to the text, and he thought about what useful thing could come from the conversation, and what harm it could do, and what Danielle would have said. Danielle would have said, "You've been carrying people's weight your whole life." "Isaiah, you're allowed to put this one down," he answered. "I read your statement," Victoria said. Her voice was stripped of the particular quality it had always carried before the certainty, the architectural confidence. She sounded tired in the way that people sound when something has broken open inside them and the contents are still settling. "Okay. I don't understand why you did it." "Which part?" "The part where you asked people not to. You didn't have to do that. After everything, you didn't owe me that. I didn't do it for you." "Then why?" "Because I have a daughter who is going to grow up watching how I handle things. And I want her to learn that you can hold someone accountable without making their destruction the point. That justice and cruelty are not the same thing even when the person deserves the consequences." He paused. "And because I've spent my entire life being expected to absorb other people's worst behavior with grace and restraint, I've had to be the controlled one in situations where control should not have been required of me. I'm not going to stop being that person now, just because the power has shifted. That would mean it was always just strategy. It was never strategy." Silence on the line. "Isaiah." Her voice had changed again. Something rawer now. "I need you to know that She stopped. Started again. When Julian showed me the footage. When I watched it back. Nia's face when I looked at her. I've been seeing that since Thursday morning, and I can't unsee it." Isaiah said nothing. "I don't know if that changes anything for you." I don't know if it should, but I need you to know that I've seen it, that I understand. At least I'm starting to understand what I actually did. What did you do, Victoria? His voice was quiet, not challenging, genuinely asking. Another silence. Longer. I decided who you were before I looked at you, and then I made sure you knew it. And who did you decide I was? Someone who didn't count. The words sat between them on the line like something physical. Yeah, Isaiah said. That's it exactly. I'm sorry, I hear you. That's not, she stopped. You're not going to accept that, are you? I'm not going to reject it, either. I'm going to watch what happens next. That's the only honest answer I can give you right now. Remorse that's real shows up in behavior over time. I don't know yet what yours looks like in 3 months or 3 years. Neither do you. That's fair. It's the most I can offer. She was quiet. The investigation is going to be thorough, she said. Julian is cooperating fully. The employees who came forward, I'm not going to interfere with their accounts. Whatever the investigation finds, I'm committed to it being public. Good. And the employees who were the ones who experienced what they described, I want there to be actual remediation. Not language. Not adjusted policies, real remediation. That's also good. Tell Julian I said so. Will you? She paused. Is there anything, any form of conversation, going forward, that you'd be open to? Not about business. About the broader, about what needs to change. In how companies like mine operate. Isaiah thought about that. Possibly, he said. Not now, give it time. Demonstrate the change first. Then maybe there's something worth talking about. Okay, Victoria. Yes, don't do this for me. Don't do it because of the footage or the press or the board pressure. Do it because you walked into a room and saw human beings you'd been treating as furniture, and you finally understood what you were looking at. Do it because that's worth changing for its own sake. She didn't say anything for a moment. I'll try, she said finally. And it was the first thing she had said across all their interactions that sounded entirely unperformed. He ended the call. He sat in his kitchen in the quiet of a Friday afternoon and let everything that had happened in the past week settle over him. The gala, the termination, the board meeting, Darnell and Earl Morrison, and Franklin Cho, and Reynolds and Naya's question on a Tuesday night over cooling hot chocolate. He thought about Danielle. He always thought about Danielle when things broke open and resolved into something new. He thought about what she would have made of all of it, the $3 billion. The slap, the public story, the phone call just now. She would have rolled her eyes at the $3 billion. She had always been amused rather than impressed by large numbers, which was one of the many ways she had kept him grounded when large numbers started feeling like the point rather than a byproduct. She would have been furious about the slap. Not the quiet, contained fury he had practiced, the real kind, loud and unambiguous. The kind she was never afraid of because she had never been required to perform restraint the way he had. She would have wanted him to be furious too, but she also would have understood exactly why he wasn't. Because she had known him. Because she had spent years watching him make the choice, over and over, to channel the fury into the work rather than the display. And because she had believed, the way he believed, that the work was the point. He was still thinking about her when his phone buzzed. Marcus, you need to see this. Check your email. The Meridian Group reached out. They've been watching the story. They want to talk about a partnership. Full infrastructure scope. Isaiah, the preliminary numbers they're floating. It's larger than the Crane Global deal. Isaiah read the message. He looked at the photo of Danielle on his desk. He set the phone down. He would deal with the Meridian Group on Monday. Tonight he had promised Nia pizza and a movie, the one she'd been asking about for 3 weeks, something animated that he'd agreed to sight unseen because she'd made the request with the particular intensity that meant it actually mattered to her. He had also promised, in a moment of Friday afternoon parental recklessness, that she could stay up until 9:30. He closed his laptop. He picked up his car keys. He had work that would wait, and a daughter who wouldn't. He went to get his kid. The Meridian Group called on Monday morning at 8:47, 6 minutes before Isaiah had planned to call them. He appreciated that. It told him something about how they operated. The call lasted 2 hours and 19 minutes. By the end of it, Isaiah had a preliminary term sheet. a follow-up meeting scheduled for the following week, and a very clear sense that this was a fundamentally different kind of conversation than anything he'd had with Crane Global across 8 months of negotiation. The Meridian Group's lead representative, a woman named Carol Huang, who had 20 years in municipal infrastructure before moving to private investment, asked questions that nobody at Crane Global had ever asked questions about system longevity, about community service obligations, about what the field technicians on Northstar's payroll you actually needed to continue doing their jobs at the level they'd been doing them. Carol asked about Darnell Washington by name. She had read the board meeting summary that had been partially leaked to the press. She had read about the hurricane and the pediatric ICU and the 30-second decision. That's not a staffing line item, Carol said. That's institutional knowledge. That's the difference between a system that works and a system that technically functions. How do you protect that in a partnership structure? Isaiah looked at his whiteboard, at the system diagrams in 3 colors of marker. You build the protection into the contract before you sign it, he said. Not as a gesture, as a condition. We can do that. I've heard that before. I know you have, and I want to earn the difference between us saying it and Crane Global saying it. That's going to take time, and I accept that. But I want you to know that when I ask that question, I'm asking because the answer affects our investment thesis. A system maintained by people who know it deeply is a materially different asset than a system maintained by whoever's cheapest this quarter. We understand that. It's not charity, it's math. Isaiah sat with that for a moment. Carol. Yes, I'm going to need independent auditing rights on workforce decisions for the first 5 years. Not advisory. Binding, a pause on her end. That's unusual. So is what happened to this company in the past 2 weeks. You want in on what we've built. You protect what made it. Those are the terms. Another pause. Shorter this time. I'll take it to the partners. But I want you to know. He ended the call and quietly for a moment. Then he called Marcus. How does it feel? Marcus asked immediately. Because Marcus always knew when a call had gone a particular way. Different, Isaiah said. It feels genuinely different. Good different? Yeah, good different. He heard Marcus exhale a long, slow breath that carried several weeks of tension with it. Isaiah, can I say something I probably should have said weeks ago? Say it. What you did walking away from Crane Global. The board meeting. All of it. I supported you. I want to be clear that I supported you the whole way. But there were moments in the middle of it where I was scared. Not that you were wrong, just scared of the cost. And I should have said that to you, instead of just managing around it. I know you were scared. Marcus, you knew? You get a specific kind of efficient when you're scared. You stop asking questions and start executing. I've known you 12 years. I know your tells. A beat of silence. Then Marcus laughed the real kind, surprised out of him. 12 years, and you never said anything. I didn't need to. You always came through, Isaiah. For what it's worth. Watching you in that boardroom with Darnell and Earl and Dr. OC, I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of leaders. I've never seen anything like that. You didn't just defend a decision. You showed them what the decision was actually about. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. I had good teachers, he said finally. Most of them never knew they were teaching me anything. He thought about his mother, who had cleaned other people's houses and come home and made dinner and never once suggested that the work she did was beneath the work she was worth. He thought about his father, who had fixed other people's cars and kept meticulous records of every repair and taken pride in the precision of it, the way an artist takes pride in craft. He thought about Danielle, who had believed in Northstar before there was anything to believe in, when it was just Isaiah and a rented bay and a grid stability design that everyone said was too ambitious. He thought about Darnell Washington, driving through a hurricane at 2 a.m. All of them had been teaching him something. About what real work looks like, about what it costs, about who pays the price when the people in the boardroom make the wrong decision. Send Carol Huang the full engineering documentation, Isaiah said, and get Priya on a call with their technical team this week. I want them to understand what they're getting into before we get any deeper. Already on it, he put the phone down and turned to the second item on his desk. Not a business document. A handwritten list, his own handwriting, On the yellow legal pad, he kept for things he was still working out. At the top of the list, underlined twice, Isaiah Bennett Foundation. He had been thinking about it since the night of the gala, since the cab ride home, watching Nia sleep against his arm, thinking about what Danielle would have wanted built from something like this. Since the morning at his desk at 2 a.m., reading Crane Global's acquisition documents and thinking about Danielle's mother, taking 3 buses to dialysis twice a week. He had been thinking about all the people who existed in the infrastructure of other people's lives, the single parents, the overnight workers, the fathers, braiding their daughters' hair from YouTube tutorials because they were figuring it out alone in the dark, and what it would mean to build something specifically for them. He called Malcolm. I need to set up a foundation. Tax structure, governance, the works. I want it operational within 90 days. Malcolm didn't miss a beat. Name? The Isaiah Bennett Foundation. A pause. Softer than Malcolm's usual pauses, I know. She would have... I know. Malcolm. Okay. Malcolm's voice steadied back into professional mode, but the softness stayed underneath it. What's the scope? 3 pillars. First, support for single parents, specifically widowed and single fathers. Because there is almost nothing out there specifically for us, and I want to change that. Emergency childcare funds, legal assistance for custody and benefits navigation, direct financial support during crisis periods. He looked at his list. Second, pathways for Black engineering students. Not just scholarships, mentorship, internship pipelines, industry connections, the kind of infrastructure that other kids get through network designed to include us. He looked at the third item. Third, community energy advocacy. Legal support for low-income neighborhoods dealing with infrastructure failures. People who can fight back when a utility company decides their neighborhood's power stability is an acceptable cost to cut. Malcolm was writing. Isaiah could hear it. How are you funding it? The settlement from the legal filing against Victoria Crane. I declined the private payment, but the formal legal process will result in damages. Whatever that number is, it goes entirely to the foundation. Additionally, I'm committing 5% of my personal Northstar equity distributions annually, and I'm going to ask the Meridian Group, when we finalize that partnership, to include a community investment component as a contract requirement. You're going to use the acquisition as a funding mechanism. I'm going to use it to build what should have been built a long time ago. Malcolm stopped writing for a moment. Isaiah, I want to say something, and I want you to hear it as your lawyer and your friend. Say it. You have been carrying weight for 34 years that was not yours to carry alone. The exhaustion you described, the performing calm, the absorbing insults, the impossible standard I've watched you carry, that since the day I met you. And I want to say clearly, and on the record between us, it was never fair, it was never right. And the fact that you're building something uptemple out of the worst night of your professional life is extraordinary. But you are also allowed to just rest. At some point, you are allowed to rest. Isaiah looked at Danielle's photo. I'll rest, he said, after the foundation is operational. Malcolm laughed despite himself. That's what I thought you'd say. 90 days, Malcolm. Let's build something. The foundation's formation took 87 days. In that time, the Meridian Group partnership moved from preliminary conversations to a signed agreement, the largest in Northstar's history. Larger than the Crane Global deal in total scope, with binding worker protection clauses that Isaiah's team had negotiated into the contract language, the way you build a load-bearing wall, carefully, non-negotiably, because the whole structure depends on it. Carol Huang shook his hand at the signing and said, I want to be clear that we understand what we're getting access to. We don't take it lightly. Isaiah believed her. He was paying attention to who people were when they thought the details didn't matter. And Carol Huang cared about the details. Crane Global's independent investigation concluded 8 weeks after Victoria's leave of absence began. The findings were thorough and public, the way Victoria had committed to Isaiah they would be. 16 current and former employees provided documented accounts of discrimination and retaliation. 3 management-level practices were found to violate federal workplace protection law. The board announced structural reforms. A new external oversight committee, and a remediation fund for affected employees. Julian Cross was appointed interim CEO, while the board conducted a permanent leadership search. He called Isaiah on the day the investigation concluded. "I want you to know that the changes are real," Julian said. "Not language, real. I'll watch," Isaiah said. "That's all I'm asking." He paused. "Isaiah, for what it's worth, what you said to me in the boardroom the day I brought you the news about the acquisition, about the maintenance projections, about the neighborhoods, what about it? I had flagged those same projections internally 6 months earlier, before the negotiation even started. I was told they were within acceptable operational parameters, and you accepted that." "I accepted that," Julian said. "And I've been thinking about that every day since the gala, about what accepting that actually meant, about who paid for my acceptance." Isaiah thought about Earl Morrison. "About 43 patients on West Carver taking 4 buses 3 times a week. The people who paid for it are still there," Isaiah said. "They're still taking the buses. That doesn't get fixed by the investigation. It gets fixed by what you build next." "I know. Then build it." Victoria Crane issued her public apology 6 weeks after her leave of absence began. It was longer than most public apologies, which usually run to 3 careful paragraphs designed to sound personal while committing to nothing specific. Victoria's was 12 paragraphs and included a specific account of the gala that named what she had done without euphemism. She did not describe it as a lapse in judgment or an uncharacteristic moment. She described it as the visible expression of attitudes she had held and acted on for years, without examining them. And she said that the examination she was now conducting was painful and necessary and incomplete and ongoing. Isaiah read it once. He did not respond publicly. He did, however, write her a letter, not for publication, private, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph acknowledged that he had read her apology and that it reflected a level of honesty he had not been certain she was capable of, and that he respected the effort it must have required. The second paragraph said that his door was not closed, that the conversation he had mentioned on the phone about what needed to change in how companies like hers operated was one he was willing to have when sufficient time had passed and the changes she'd described had had room to demonstrate themselves. The third paragraph was short. It said, "My daughter asked me recently whether being rich finally made people respect me. I told her that money only made them regret disrespecting me, and that real respect should have existed before they knew my name. I'm telling you this not as an accusation. I'm telling you because I think it's the thing worth building toward. For both of us." He sealed it and mailed it. He did not keep a copy. The Isaiah Bennett Foundation's public launch happened on a Tuesday in March, 5 months after the gala. Isaiah had chosen Tuesday deliberately. Danielle's mother had gone to dialysis on Tuesdays. It was the kind of detail that nobody outside of his immediate family would understand, and that was precisely the point. The things you do in someone's memory don't require an audience to matter. The launch event was not a gala. It was a community meeting in the gymnasium of a school on the west side of the city, 2 blocks from the dialysis center on West Carver. Folding chairs, food from a family-owned restaurant on the block, a sound system that worked imperfectly and that nobody complained about. 200 people came, mostly from the neighborhood, some from Northstar's field team, Malcolm and Marcus and Priya, Franklin Cho, who had driven himself, without a driver, and arrived early and stayed late. Darnell Washington, who brought his mother. Earl Morrison, who brought 3 of his dialysis patients' people in their 60s and 70s who had put on their best clothes for the occasion and sat in the folding chairs with a dignity that made the Grand Meridian Hotel feel like a very small and very insufficient room. Isaiah stood at a podium that was slightly too short for him and looked out at those 200 faces and said less than he had prepared. My wife's name was Danielle. She believed that the most important thing you could do with anything you built was make sure it kept working for people after you stopped being the one building it. She was right about most things. She was especially right about that. He paused. This foundation exists because a woman who didn't know my name decided I wasn't worth knowing. And because that moment, as painful as it was, made something clear to me that I had been allowing myself to obscure. that the real measure of what I've built isn't the number on the acquisition offer. It's whether the people who showed up at 2 in the morning during the hurricane still have jobs that respect what they bring to them. It's whether the 43 patients at the dialysis center on this block have reliable power. It's whether a single father somewhere exhausted, figuring it out, braiding his daughter's hair from a YouTube tutorial at midnight, has somewhere to turn when the weight gets too heavy to carry alone. He looked at his hands on the podium. I spent 15 years building a system that keeps the lights on. This is what I want to spend the next 15 building. The infrastructure for the people the other infrastructure forgot. That was all he said. The room was quiet for a moment after he stepped back. Then, someone in the third row he never found out who started clapping. And it spread through the gymnasium, not in the orchestrated wave of a gala applause, but in the uneven, organic way that genuine feeling moves through a room of people who have been waiting to respond to something real. Nia, sitting in the front row between Marcus and James, watched her father step away from the podium and clapped harder than anyone. He got to her and crouched down, and she grabbed his face in both her small hands, the way she'd done since she was a toddler, the way that always reminded him of Danielle, who had done the same thing and looked at him with enormous seriousness. Mommy would have liked that speech. Yeah? She would have said you talked too long. But she would have liked it. He laughed. Full and unguarded and real. She always said, I talked too long. Because you do. Nia let go of his face and straightened with the satisfaction of someone who has delivered accurate feedback. But the part about the people at 2 in the morning was good. That part was really good. You think so? I think she would have underlined that part. He looked at his daughter in the folding chair, in the gymnasium of a school 2 blocks from a dialysis center. Wearing her navy dress with the white stars, the one she'd picked herself, and he thought about the Grand Meridian Hotel and the chandelier and the strawberry tart and the sound of a slap in a room full of crystal glasses and expensive shoes, and how far that moment had traveled to arrive here. He thought about all the things that moment had broken open: the acquisition, the boardroom, the investigation, the foundation, the conversation with Victoria, the letter. All of it cascading from one decision made in a hotel ballroom by a woman who had looked at a black man in a rented tuxedo and decided he wasn't worth the time it would take to find out who he was. She had been trying to close a door. She had opened one instead. That was the thing about contempt. Isaiah had learned across a lifetime of absorbing it. It was blunt. It could not aim precisely. It swung wide and hit things the person wielding it had no idea were standing there. Victoria Crane had not been trying to expose Crane Global's workplace culture. She had not been trying to fund a community foundation on the west side of the city. She had not been trying to force herself into the kind of reckoning that made her write a 12-paragraph apology that read, for the first time, like a person rather than a press office. She had been trying to remove a man who didn't fit her picture of who belonged in her ballroom. She had done the opposite of every single thing she'd intended. Isaiah stood up from the crouch beside Nia's chair and looked around the gymnasium, at the folding chairs and the imperfect sound system, and the food from the family restaurant, and the 200 people who had shown up because something was being built here that was worth showing up for. He thought about Nia's question. The one she'd asked over hot chocolate on a Tuesday night. The one he'd written on the notepad by the kitchen counter. The one he'd put on the final slide of a board presentation that had changed the direction of his company. Would she still have hit you if she knew you were important? He had answered honestly. Probably not. But he had been thinking about the question differently in the months since. Not about Victoria's answer to it. About what the question itself revealed about the world his daughter was growing up. In a world where that question made sense. Where importance and protection were connected in people's minds, where the calibration of how much dignity a person deserved was still being done on a sliding scale determined by factors that had nothing to do with the person's actual worth. He did not want Nia to grow up in a world where that question made sense. He could not change the whole world. He had never been confused about the scope of what one person could do. But he could build things that pushed in the right direction. Son. He could maintain systems that treated every neighborhood's power reliability as equally worth protecting. He could run a company where the field technician who drove through a hurricane had the same institutional backing as the director who sat in the boardroom. He could fund a foundation that said, explicitly and structurally, the people who have been invisible to the systems built around them are not invisible to us. He could raise a daughter who knew that her father did not wait to be recognized before he acted like he deserved to be in the room. Those were not small things. Those were, in fact, the whole point. 6 months after the gala, Nia's school held its science fair. It was a Saturday morning, and the gymnasium, a different gymnasium from the foundation launch, smaller, with hand-drawn posters and a banner that said Future Scientists, taped slightly, crookedly above the double doors, was packed with kids and parents and teachers and the particular energy of people who have worked hard on something and are ready to show it. Nia had been working on her project for 8 weeks. She had not told Isaiah exactly what it was, only that it required cardboard, string, a small light bulb, and access to the engineering whiteboard for 3 evenings in a row, during which he had been permitted in the office only to provide materials and answer specific technical questions, and then asked to leave. He had complied mostly. He stood beside her table now, in front of her project, and looked at what she had built. It was a model city, cardboard buildings, hand-labeled a hospital, a water tower, a neighborhood of small houses, a building marked dialysis center, in careful block letters that made something catch in his throat, and running between them all, a miniature electrical grid, string and small copper connectors and a battery pack, and, at the center of it, a tiny control module that Nia had built from a kit but modified herself, changing the connection sequence so that the hospital and the dialysis center received power first, when the battery was low, and the other buildings received it after. She had drawn a small figure beside the control module and labeled it in her handwriting, the person who keeps the lights on. Isaiah looked at the model city for a long time. Her teacher, a woman named Mrs. Albright, who had been teaching 4th grade for 22 years and had seen thousands of science fair projects and knew which ones were real and which ones were assembled by parents, came to stand beside Isaiah. She explained the circuit design to me for 15 minutes, Mrs. Albright said. I understood about half of it. The half I understood was impressive. She figured out the priority sequence herself, Isaiah said quietly. The hospital getting power first. I didn't help with that part. I know, I asked her. She said. Mrs. Albright paused, and her voice changed slightly. She said that some buildings are more important than others, not because they're bigger, but because more people need them to work. She said her dad taught her that. Isaiah kept his eyes on the model city. She taught herself that, he said. I just kept the lights on. When the judging was done and the ribbons were being distributed, a boy from another class stopped beside Nia's table and pointed at her model. What is it? It's a city, Nia said, with a smart power grid. Why does the hospital get the light first? Because if the hospital loses power, people can die. So you protect the most important things first. The boy looked at the model for a moment. Who decides what's most important? Nia looked at the question seriously. Isaiah watched her think. The person who builds the system, she said. That's why you have to build it right the first time. The boy nodded and moved on. Nia looked at her father. Was that a good answer? Isaiah looked at his daughter. At her navy dress with the white stars and her braids that he had learned from a YouTube tutorial 4 years ago and had gotten better at every year. At her face that held Danielle's eyes and her grandfather's stubborn jaw and something in her own that was still becoming itself, still arriving, still being shaped by every conversation at the kitchen table and every honest answer he gave to questions that deserved honest answers. That was the best answer I've ever heard, he said. She accepted this with the satisfaction of someone who had prepared well and received accurate feedback, and turned back to explain her model to the next person, who stopped. Isaiah stood beside her and watched the Saturday morning gymnasium fill with emotion and the ordinary, extraordinary thing of children showing each other what they had built. He thought about Danielle. He thought about the scratched Seiko watch on his wrist. and the rented tuxedo and a strawberry tart that had fallen off a table and changed the direction of everything that came after. He thought about what it had cost to hold his ground in that ballroom, what it had cost to make the call at midnight, what it had cost to stand at the head of a boardroom table with his field technicians beside him and show 11 directors what was actually at stake. He thought about what it had built. The model city on Naya's table had its lights on, all of them: the hospital, the water tower, the dialysis center on the corner, the small houses with their hand-drawn windows, every light on. The system working the way a system is supposed to work when the person who built it right. Isaiah Bennett had walked into the Grand Meridian Hotel in a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit, holding his daughter's hand, and a woman who believed that power entitled her to decide who deserved dignity had tried to make him feel like nothing. She had failed. Not because he had $3 billion. Not because he had a controlling vote and a patent portfolio and a company that kept the lights on in 11 states. She had failed because Isaiah Bennett had known, long before anyone in that ballroom knew his name, exactly what he was worth, and no amount of money, no chandelier, no expensively shod foot with a strawberry tart on it, had ever once made him forget it. That was the thing Victoria Crane had never understood. And the thing Nia had understood at 7 years old without being taught it, because she had been watching her father her entire life, and she had seen it in everything he did. Dignity is not granted by recognition. It is built, quietly and daily, in every decision you make when nobody important is watching, in every honest answer to a child's question, in every field technician treated as essential rather than expendable, in every midnight phone call to a lawyer that cost you $3 billion because some things cost more to keep than to sell. Victoria Crane had looked at Isaiah Bennett and seen someone who didn't count. He had spent every day since proving, in the only way that actually matters, that she had been looking at exactly the wrong thing. The lights were on. They were always going to stay on.